So this one might seem like a cute tangent until you understand where I'm coming from. You can look at a board game as the complexity of the rules, or you can look at a board game as its strategic depth. And what I mean by strategic depth is if you just started playing and then you're playing against someone who's better at it, such that they win 2/3 of the time, for example. You just pick a fraction more than 50%. 2/3 or 9/10 of the time, whatever fraction you want. So look at how much better someone has to be beating you some certain fraction of the time. And that same fraction, is there someone who beats that person by the same fraction? Someone else beats this guy 2/3 of the time, and then someone else beats this person beats this person 2/3 of the time, and this person beats this person 2/3 of the time. How many times does that go up? That gives you the strategic depth of a board game, distinct from the complexity of the rules. So, by that measure of strategic depth compared to rule complexity, the board game with the most strategic depth has been around 4,000 years at least, and it's called Go. It's from China, and it's just a grid of open squares. You're going to play at where the grid intercepts the lines, and you start with the board empty, and each player, the two players, take turns laying a stone at that crossing point. And the rules are very simple. You each take turns playing a stone. You can pass if you want to. When you play two stones that are connected by a line, they're considered like an amoeba. They merge into one structure. And so you can have these big, long amoeba structures that are connected by the straight lines. And the only way a stone can be removed from the board is if all of the vacancies around that stone have been filled in. So if you have one stone, there's four vacancies around it. I think of them as breathing holes. If you're sitting underwater with a tube to breathe, a snorkel or something. So to capture this stone, the enemy has to put a stone in all four positions around it that are connected by a line. Now it has no escape, no breathing holes. So if you have a structure where the structure encloses an empty spot, the enemy can't play there without immediately being suffocated, because they're playing into location where you already occupy all of their stones' breathing holes. They could try playing there, but they're immediately captured. And if you wanted to survive for the entire game, you need a structure with two breathing holes within the structure. Now, even if the enemy surrounds you completely, they could try playing in one breathing hole, and their stone would suffocate. They would have to be able to play in both breathing holes simultaneously to be able to surround and suffocate your structure. And they can't. You only get one move per turn. So in Go, two eyes is immortal. And the scoring of Go is based on how many of these intercept points, the crossing points, are surrounded by your stones only. That's your territory. If there's a region of points and you are the only person touching the points that surround it, that's your territory. If the enemy plays even one stone inside, it's not your territory anymore. So it's territory plus captures. That's it. Yeah, almost. There's also an extra rule called the Ko rule, which is basically no backsies. Anytime a player has played a stone, you're going to take a photo of the board, and the photo of the board can never repeat. The board can never look identical after a move compared to some other earlier time after a move. And that prevents infinite loops that never go anywhere. That's all. So that's Go. It's a few simple rules, and it produces the greatest strategic depth that we've seen in any board game ever. That's why mathematicians love Go. And there was a classic interview with a chess grandmaster after a tournament victory, where the interviewer asked him, "Okay, you're famous for playing chess, but we hear that you also like to play Go. You play it for pleasure. You play chess as your work day, but you play Go for fun. Why is that?" And he explained that the rules of the pieces in chess are all very strangely particular. The knight's move, think the rules for how pawns work. It's very strange in particular. So we would not expect an alien civilization to play chess. But the rules of Go are so simple and straightforward and natural that we should expect aliens to play Go. So when we were all playing Go for thousands of years, the layers of strategic depth and the intuitive, creative, vague sense around the board is that you're laying stones in any position. There's so many places to play, and there's so many options that can each serve many purposes. We thought naively that this would be a very difficult game for robots. Mathematicians solved checkers a while ago. We figured out backgammon. That's done. Those games are done. And it was with IBM's Deep Blue, which was a supercomputer that just computed lots of options. They were able to beat Kasparov in chess. That was like a landmark of AI for a while. So checkers, not so bad. It's a pretty easy game. Chess was significantly harder, and it was solved by brute force on lots and lots of options, a huge knowledge bank. But they still couldn't get even high amateur level Go. It wasn't until very recently you had computers that could beat even a moderately well-versed Go player. Because it was so intuitive and there were so many options. And we thought it would stay that way for a long time. If you ask someone in 2015, when will artificial intelligence be able to beat the best Go players in the world? We were all saying it would be 40 or 50 years at least, if ever. That's where we were all at. And then AlphaGo happened. Demis Hassabis with DeepMind, they used tree search, and they trained an AI that was making intuitive, creative moves. And it beat Lee Sedol famously. This was devastating. What was it? Move 37. That's something else. So there was a lot of fervor around that moment that, like, wait, AI can think creatively and intuitively and beat humans at this very vague, high-level strategy. We're in the game with simple rules, but many, many layers of strategic depth. And then we kind of stopped because we didn't have any games with more strategic depth. We didn't have a better one to test the AI. So you can look at my essay online. It's free to read. It's called Phoenixian. So write Phoenix and then I-A-N, Phoenixian. Just Google my name and the name of the essay. This is a modification, just a few subtle modifications to the rules of Go that elevate its strategic complexity orders of magnitude. We're talking about like Go to the third power. And y'all just missed it. It's kind of funny. So DeepMind would not be able to win this game. Your AI is not good enough yet. And I'm pretty sure humans aren't either. So Go operates on a square grid, and you're playing at the intercepts. The first thing we're going to do is it's going to be triangle grid, making hexagon patterns. So now there's more connections to each point. There's 6 connections to an intercept instead of just 4. And just for convenience here, this is just I've I've complained about this for a while. Instead of a flat board with lines drawn on it and you're playing it where the lines intercept, we drill a hole. And you're not playing a stone, you're playing a peg that goes into the hole. This is a lot better for when you're like in the car playing or like on the subway or something. Just drill holes at the intercepts. Now there's no confusion, you don't accidentally bump them. It's a lot more stable of a board design from an engineer standpoint. So we're going to drill holes at these triangle grid intercepts. And the board itself is no longer a square because it's made of triangles. What we're going to do is we're going to make a rugged circular shape. Just like if you're taking a pixelated paint program and drawing a circle with it, it's actually kind of lumpy. We're going to make that lumpiness on the edges, so it's a ragged edge the whole way around. It's not a perfect hexagon. It's a lumpy, ragged edge. And that creates lots of little nooks and crannies that change the board dynamics. All of those nooks and crannies behave like a corner in a weird way. So that's going to make the game more distributed rather than having the focus of early play be the joseki at the four corners. We get rid of that problem. So you got this almost circular board made of triangle grids where you got peg holes. And the pieces are not just one peg. This is the key innovation of Phoenixian. The pieces are a two-peg flag. Just take two little pegs, connect them with a little piece of wood or paper or whatever you're going to use to make your board. And that flag or fence post is what you place so that the two pegs each go into a hole next to each other. And the peg is sized such that each hole can only hold one peg. You can't stuff two different fences pegs into the same hole. It's physically not possible. We're going to keep you from even thinking that by making the hole the same size as the peg. And that's Phoenixian. That's all. That just changed Go by that much. And it is insane how much more strategic depth, how much further you get in strategy with that version. So for jargon's sake, I'm just going to contrast for a moment because I'll be using these words. I said fence post or flag, but that's just to express what it would look like. My computer blurped at me. Hold on. But the jargon from the conceptual metaphor with Go, he's got a square board with all these grid point intercepts, and you're laying troops. It's like an army to capture territory and create fortifications. That's what an eye is when you form an enclosed surface. So moving away from that land-based territorial metaphor, Phoenixian is a metaphor about islands and fleets and trade routes. So when you lay a flag, we're going to call it a fleet. That's a ship in the ocean. And when you form a ring of ships in the ocean, that is now an island. Your territory is an island. And then when they connect in long snaking patterns, that's a trade route connecting two islands, for example. So fleets, islands, trade routes, that's Phoenixian. It's a board game of naval conquest, if you want to conceptualize that metaphor. Here's the key difference in how Phoenixian plays out versus Go. With Go, you can approach very close to your enemy structures. With Phoenixian, it works a bit differently because each peg pair, each fleet, is taking up two positions. And so you can rapidly extend distances, but at the same time, someone else can lay a peg, which creates a much longer detour. You have to travel further around them when they lay a peg to block you. And this causes much more zigzagging expansion from any what's normally called joseki. And more importantly, because you want to avoid that scenario, you will tend to lay your fleet with a gap to the other fleet. The enemy fleet and your fleet have a gap between them. There's a few peg holes between you. And it's very difficult to approach and fill in that gap. So you're going to want a much larger board. A 32 by 32 dimension would be tenable. And that gap creates what mathematicians are going to call a parity cascade. Parity is odds and evens. Basically, you can only play two pegs at a time. There's no way to play only one peg because each fleet piece has two pegs. So you have to count the parity of the zone that's available. And you can block in such a way to divide the zone into remaining groups where it's no longer even, it's now two odds. And that parity cascade ends up being critical for the evolution of the game. Getting deeper into that concept, when you're playing a go stone on a single intercept, it has its four vacancies, its four breathing holes. But with Phoenixian, there are degrees of freedom around each hole. So if you have a hole and there's 6 peg holes around it, you are going to place a pair of pegs in any of those orientations, and each of them is a degree of freedom upon that peg. And this becomes very important if, for example, there's a set of holes and then enemy positions have taken up some of the surrounding pegs, but not others. There's an opening. You could play in that opening, or you could play within the zone. And you can restrict your enemy ability to play by creating those odd numbered or odd shaped zones. So what this does functionally, we're looking at jumping up the ladder of strategic complexity. You don't want to play your Joseki in tight formations. Instead, what you're going to do is lay a very wide perimeter. You lay a wide net such that within that zone, no matter what the enemy plays, you have a way to capture them, to prevent them from snaking out and forming connections somewhere else. So you're going to form this very loose, wide net. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, who, seeing the vast, wide-meshed net of heaven, knows just how it is cast. So that's the model here. If you want to surround a territory, you don't plug it up with fortifications. You want to lay fleets in a wide perimeter in such a position that your enemy just can't move within it. They just have to give up. And that causes, even though it's a very large board, especially compared to Champion Go boards. Champion Go boards are only 19 by 19. We're talking 32 by 32. It's a much larger board, but you very quickly just lay a few different positions, and they lay a few different positions, and you're capturing zones on the board with these wide open structures, and they bump into each other. And where your wide open net bumps into their wide open net, now we've got what behaves similar to quasi-crystals. We can get into some weird physics and all kinds of stuff. So now you've got this vibratory structure. It wants to stabilize over the course of time. It's uncertain right now, and as we keep playing into it, it's going to resolve into certainty. It's going to become fixed. And these crystal structures that are trying to push against each other, you can now penetrate from your crystal structure into their crystal structure. And that can allow you to burst their bubble. You can capture that territory even though those original fleets prevented anyone from playing within it. Now that you have your own zone next to them, you can start penetrating into their zone and capturing it. So this is very different from Go, where you're starting out by capturing each corner and then moving along the perimeter to capture territory along the perimeter, and only much later are you moving toward the center. That's how Go works. You're fighting over the corners, then you're fighting over the edges, and then you're fighting over the center. And because Go has that progression from corner to edge to center, even though there's hundreds of places you could play, the actual possibility space is much smaller. Because you're definitely going to start in one of the corners, and then you're definitely moving to the edges. You're not moving out to row 5 early on. And you're definitely not moving to the center unless you want to be a jackass who plays the hand of God move. You're like, I'm going in the exact center. Nah. So that's Go. Is it has a huge possibility space, but the practical places for you to play are much more limited. With Phoenixian, in contrast, these wide quasi-crystal-like structures can go almost anywhere. And so much more of the board is viable potential space for play from very early on. And that radically increases the possibility space. So the search tree of potential viable moves in Phoenixian is many times larger at each layer compared to Go. And that means DeepMind's tree search will not be feasible. You cannot use the AlphaGo method to play Phoenixian. And when you're pressuring each other with these crystals, these wide nets, you're trying to penetrate, the best move for penetration here depends upon all the other crystals' exact positions. The exact positions of every crystal that's bumping up against every other crystal across the entire board. You need to know that entire grouping's total effect to determine the best move here. Which means if a way to think about this with a physics metaphor is the whole board becomes mutually entangled at a very early stage in play. They all have interlocking long-range dependencies very early on. You've each only laid a few dozen pieces, and the entire board depends upon the entire board. And as you move in closer to each other and try to form structures, the gap that you have, because you don't actually want to push directly against your opponent, the gap and the parity rules mean that you end up forming moving zones like this that form shapes that look like the grain of wood or the flow of water. It has an anisotropic flow pattern moving across the board. And as you resolve it more and more, as you get toward the end of the game, it's going to look like a reaction diffusion mechanism. It's the fingerprint of God. It's just let's just jump to the highest level. I know you won't get there. So the key concept there is that because you have this flow pattern forming, the each fleet is long, and you run them in chains that meander across the board, and there's a gap between them. Now that flow pattern and the parity rule means it eventually forms long parity dependency chains, meandering all over. There's these long zones meandering with a parity matching rule. And the partitioning of that parity rule is analogous in a way to Boolean logic, but it operates on a 2D plane where the logic streams can cross. This gets crazy. This is gnarly. If I've lost you, I understand. I'm jumping so far ahead of where most people think about games. If you want to look at the mathematical treatment of, it's called dots and dashes, where we're drawing lines between dots and you try to enclose squares. That has a similar parity rule mechanic, where you form these long, but they're on a grid, so they're squared. Not to the second power, but they're perpendicular pathings, where you form long parity chains. But with Phoenixian, these parity chains are meandering, and they can intercept in a web. And it's very difficult in that scenario to actually capture enemy pieces or even create your own territory. So in a way, you can think of it like a Go board is a lot like basketball, where at the end of the game, people have 50 to 80 points. They got lots of captures and territory, and it's about who got more of those. You might win by only a few points, but you each got lots of points. With Phoenixian, it's more like non-American football. You are lucky to get a few territory, and it is a surprise if you can grab a capture. So you're fighting over every single point at all. Just getting a few points by the end of the game is going to be difficult for you. And you're not even going to know if you get those points until just before the very end of the game. The whole board is unresolved until almost the final conclusion. And that means you have to search down that huge tree space of branching possibilities all the way to the bottom before you can assess the value of a particular move early in the beginning. So if you want an AI to play Phoenixian, it's going to have to be a hyper-scaled quantum solver. You might be able to use a D-Wave quantum annealing system, but anything short of that is going to fail. And you get all that huge search space, indeterminacy all the way to the end, complex Boolean weave, hyper entangled zones early on in the game, with just a few changes to the rules of Go. There you go.